Welcome to the program. I'm Mark Wallace, your host and facilitator for the Monday night edition of the People Show on intellectualradio.com, iHeartRadio, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. Got to get right into this, and I want to deal with the most boring part of what I have to talk about, but it's what we're going to have to be talking about over the next 4 years, unfortunately. One thing I want to get into, I saw this story today. Of course, we had some horrific things happen, but I saw this one story today that about an app that they're doing down in Miami, Florida, in terms of people who want to find homes to live or to relocate to live. They're actually providing people with information, block by block, as to how people voted, whether they voted for Kamala Harris or whether they voted for Donald Trump, which in some indications is another indication, or, to further divide us or to segregate us from now, not only based on ethnicity, but now based on how one person votes. Seems a little bit raunchy to me, but, I read that about this particular app that is going to be put forth, but seems to be kind of ridiculous to me. But that's where we are today, and that's unfortunately how we are. That seems to be how we are. As a people, it's just very funny that we are okay. We are okay. I'm sorry, that was just my phone line connected. I'm going to open the lines up real early tonight, 951-221-8221. If you want to call into the program, you're certainly welcome to do that, 951-221-8221. Today, Donald Trump had a press conference that lasted a little bit more than an hour, and he just told a bunch of horrific lies. I shouldn't really call them horrific, but they are horrific because he's going to be the president of the United States that told a bunch of lies, and I know that there are many people who support him and thinks that he is the greatest thing since sliced bread, the greatest thing since frozen ice, and they are going to be supporting him. And unfortunately, that is going to be a lot of people who are low information people, who don't really get the facts, who don't really study, who really think that somehow all of this bluster that he frenzies out and the media just wraps it up and loves it, because only for one reason, that it brings eyeballs. It's performative. That's all it is. It's not based on any real principles of facts, but because he is the person who will have the power, and evidently they've given him the power to do so, and whatever he says, they very rarely go back and fact check him on the ridiculous statements that he made. Like today, he stood up and said, well, the government knows where these drones are coming from and who is doing it. They absolutely know about it, and won't tell the people, based on not one shred of information or facts that he has. And if in fact he is having conversations with our government and with the government and with the Pentagon, it shows you how irresponsible he is. If in fact what he said is true, which is not true because it's not rooted in any facts, it goes to show you that he will compromise the national security of the country, and certainly our national security, period. He will do whatever it is he wants to do. Why? Because the man is a blatant idiot. That half of the electorate that voted decided that this is the way that they want to go. They want to have an idiot as a representative, and hopefully that we have a Congress. Hopefully that we have a Congress that will keep him in check from just doing all kinds of ridiculous things to blow up any progress that is being made. He's going to be inheriting a great economy, none of which that he produced, that was produced by the Biden-Harris administration. And there are going to be great things continuing to roll out over the next few years that had nothing to do with his administration and will have nothing to do with his administration. His administration can't stop it. His administration, can't do anything about it. What it can do is, if they really cared about people and the average person in the United States, they would build upon this economy and continue to do things that makes it better, to makes it stronger. So, but being the idiot that he is, and that he proves that he is, he will find a way to just bluster himself and to screw things up. Hopefully that won't happen. I don't want anybody to be walking around in fear of Donald Trump. There's no reason to fear him. I know he wants people to think that he is, this all-powerful person, and I know that some people will characterize him as being that. But the truth of the matter is, that's not the case. That's not the case. What we have is a person who has somehow been able to convince people that he should be the president of the United States twice, and that's really unfortunate. Now, and I can go on about my frustration with the Democratic Party and how stupid I think that they conducted themselves through the election, and how they allowed themselves to get sucked into putting the party and putting the rest of us Democrats into this very difficult position that they did. And we didn't have any other choice, but we had to certainly work with it. We had to work hard and try to get Kamala Harris elected after the Democrats basically ate their own and pushed Joe Biden aside, pushed the man aside who brought transformational policies in place that rescued us out of the dismal economic abyss that we were going into because of the ego of Donald Trump and his mishandling of the pandemic and what that caused onto the economy with inflation and all of those other issues that we had to deal with the supply chain problems and getting goods and services and getting goods in where it caused for inflation to skyrocket. However, with that, just the enormous effort and the work that was put in by the Biden-Harris administration. After all of that, and the Democratic Party basically ate their own, while the Republicans had the most reviled, disgusting human being as a candidate, and they wrapped their arms around him as though he was an archbishop. But the Democrats treated Joe Biden as though he was the reviled criminal. Just was stupid, in my opinion. The Democrats were very stupid in the way that they handled that, and we lost as a result of it. In my opinion, we lost. There were 53% of white women who said, I'm not going to vote for a woman. 52% of white women did the same thing against Hillary Clinton. However, 34% of Hispanic men who said they would have voted for Joe Biden if he was the candidate voted for Donald Trump. That's where the real margin was. That's where the real margin was. So the Democrats failed, in my opinion. That being said, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Maybe not tonight, but some other time I'll go into it in depth. So just getting that off my chest. I am a Democrat. I'm going to be a Democrat. I'm not going anywhere. I think we have to elect better Democrats locally, statewide, and nationally that have guts and that are willing to stand up and fight. And continue to fight for those policies that are good for the average person in this country and not just for corporate greed, and get back to that type of fighting and get into the areas where you didn't go to. Stop trying to compete with the Republicans and their corporatist ideology. Let them have that. That's not what the values of the Democratic Party or certainly the Democratic voters are. And so we have to, we certainly have to make sure that that we do a better job of that. All right. So now, Donald Trump stood today, did, I think it was a 64 minute diatribe of nothing but lies, where he talked about the war has to end, and if the war doesn't end in Ukraine, that there's going to be hell to pay, and that Zelensky must make a deal. Too many people are dying. Well, you know, too many people are dying because Putin decided to invade somebody else's house, and you should go to Putin and tell him to get his troops out. He's losing troops by the hundreds of thousands, and thousands of people in Ukraine are dying, but Ukraine are not going to just roll over and allow for you to take somebody else's house. Imagine somebody coming to your house and you don't defend your house, and you need to make a deal with them to give them part of your house. You know, but of course, who knows what his relationship is with Putin, but it certainly seems that he seems to have some sort of affinity for this guy. But who knows what that is? Who knows what it is? So now the other thing is, Donald Trump and his troops went to the Army-Navy game on this past weekend, and they took Daniel Penny, the guy who killed a homeless man on a train, and who was exonerated of murder. And J.D. Vance and Trump invited him to come to the game and paraded him to the game and put him out before the game. But let me tell you what I see that is. What I see that is. And of course, before that, I go into that. Remember, Donald Trump started talking about the mass deportations. And who did he use as a great example of people sending their criminals? What did he say? The Congo. For all you black folks who think that Donald Trump is this great supporter for black folks that cast the ballot for him, for all of you who did that and thinks that he's going to do something for black people, He sends a message every single time showing you that he cares nothing about black people and what he thinks about black people. And you all who supported him, are badly misinformed. So the fact that he takes Daniel Penny and they invite him and take him to the Army-Navy game and put him before the country as some sort of hero, send a particular message to black people that this is what's going to happen to you under my leadership if you step out of line. If we perceive you to step out of line, this is what you are going to be faced with, and there's going to be no repercussions for the people who keep you in line. That's the message that they were sending. Period. They weren't talking to anybody else except for black people and didn't have to say a word. You can, if you believe as a white man that a black person is out of order, you have the right and permission to deal with them, and there will be no consequences whatsoever. They said to the police, we're coming into power and we are going to be your protection. You can do your job and not have to worry about any consequences whatsoever. So that's what they're saying. Now, they're also setting up a real problem. And my never to be humble opinion about this, because that's what I saw that as. No sensitivity for the black man who had a problem whatsoever, and other people who told Daniel Penny to let him go. Now, what I don't understand is why people on that train, why black people on that train didn't do something more to stop Daniel Penny from choking this man to death. That I just don't understand. Don't understand. Regardless of what he was saying, he didn't have a gun, he didn't have a knife, he didn't have a weapon, but he deserved to be dead. Yes, if you're black, that's the price that you could pay. And there's no consequences for it. This also could be their way of celebrating, to saying that, you know, you convicted a police officer of murdering George Floyd, and he's in federal prison. Don't be surprised if Donald Trump doesn't commute that sentence, because it's a federal sentence. Can't do anything about the state sentence, but there's a federal sentence. Don't be surprised. I won't be a bit surprised. I'll be surprised if he does not commute that sentence. Sending and bringing and parading Daniel Penny before black people is sending a message to black people at a military to military game that under his leadership, he will not allow for that to happen, and he's going to do all that he can to protect police officers who step out of bounds. Because I don't want to, in any way, shape, or form, indict all police officers or suggest it, because most police officers who get up and put on that uniform, black, white, Hispanic, whatever, Asian, go to work to do that job. But there are those who have put on that uniform as a mask so that they can perpetrate their own level of disdain and hate against certain people and be shielded by it, by the badge and the uniform. There are those out there. So, this is where we are. And that's my thoughts on it. The other thing that I have a issue with, and I just don't know, well, I do know why they did it, in part, because they basically said it. This thing with George Stephanopoulos, where George Stephanopoulos referred to the Jean Carroll case that found Trump liable for sexual assault, and George Stephanopoulos kept referring to it that he was found liable of rape. And Judge Kaplan came out and clarified. Judge Kaplan, who presided over both the Carroll's lawsuits against Donald Trump, said the definition of rape in the state code was far narrower than how rape is defined in common modern parlance. In some dictionaries, in some federal and state criminal statutes, and elsewhere, under the New York law, a rape finding requires vaginal penetration by a penis, forcible penetration without consent of the vaginal or other bodily orifices, by fingers or anything else labeled sexual abuse. The judge said the verdict did not mean that Carroll failed to prove that Mr. Trump, quote, raped her, as many commonly understood the word rape. Indeed, the jury found that Mr. Trump, in fact, did exactly that. That came from the judge. Why ABC allowed Trump this victory, it is beyond the pale that they are treating this man as though he is some type of giant, that he cannot be held accountable, and that they are afraid of this idiot of a person, this vile, disgusting human being of a person. He is a criminal. He is convicted of a crime in 34 felony counts in the state of New York. We have a convicted felon and a person who was found liable, according to what Judge Kaplan clarified in the verdict, where he said in his own words that the jury found that Mr. Trump, in fact, did exactly that. These people running around here and afraid of this man, or maybe they're not so afraid of him. Maybe they are pretending to be afraid of him, and maybe they support what he is doing. Maybe that could be. And maybe they're masking their support for him as being, quote unquote, afraid of him. Could that potentially be? Could that possibly be what this situation is? But I tell you this, I tell you what we have to do, and what I want to encourage all of us who don't support that type of buffoonery, that type of vile, disgusting conduct, and that do not support Donald Trump, that we do not have to be afraid of this man. And I don't want for us to spend a whole lot of time with that all. What we need to continue to do is to do what we need to do to empower ourselves, to make sure that we elect better, stronger people from the Democratic side that's going to fight for the average working person and to fight for poor people and to continue working to make a more perfect union, and not going back to making America great again, which is a signal from that side to let's reverse the clock, let's reverse the progress for certain people in this country. That's really what that means. Let's reverse the clock. So, what I want to encourage for us to do is to get laser focused now so that we can make sure that those things that are important and the things that we are making progress in continues, and that we make even greater progress by getting laser focused and organizing ourselves together so that we can make sure that right here where we are in our communities, in the cities, and in the country, that progress continues, that we continue to advocate for, to making the kinds of progress that we need to make. Because there are going to be great opportunities that are going to be coming, and we have to make sure that the people who represent us, whether it be in our local municipalities, at the state level, and at the federal level, we have to make sure that Brandon Johnson, the people in the city council, the people in the county board, the people in the General Assembly who happen to be the people in leadership, we have to make sure that they are delivering for our communities. Why do we have to do that? Because billions of dollars are coming to the state from the federal government, even with Trump in office. Why? Because they weren't appropriated by him. They were appropriated by the 118th Congress, proposed by the 46th President of the United States, Joe Biden, and the Vice President, Kamala Harris, that put these policies together. They're going to be bringing billions of dollars in investments to our state, just as they are going to other states. So that's what we have to get focused on. Not spending a whole lot of time focusing on an idiot who's going to lie and lie and lie and bolster and lie and do what they want to do. Believe me, they're going to grift. They're going to make sure that their people are taken care of. That's what we have to live with for the next 4 years, because that's what the country decided. That's what the country decided. So that's what we're going to have to live with at the federal level. Here at the local and state level, we don't have to live with that. We're in the position, if in fact we organize ourselves to do that. If we organize ourselves to do it, we're in a position to make sure that things thrive in our communities. Or we're going to be in a position to get passed over. Are we going to get focused together? Are we going to organize ourselves together? You know, I talk about that all the time, and I'm going to continue to talk about it, because that's what we have to do to advance those things that we believe that we want and we deserve and that we need for our communities to become stronger and safer. Then we have to put ourselves in a position of power to demand and to dictate, so that we have the same power to do positive things for our community that the sycophants and the MAGA are doing on a negative, to threaten people who are in public office that if they step out of line, there's a price to pay. We have to do the same thing, but for positive results and outcomes, we have to do the same thing. But we're not doing it, but we have to do that. That's what I want for us to get focused on, to get laser focused on stopping bad policies from going forward, stopping the continuation of misrepresentation and taxing and fining and feeing certain communities and certain people without any consequence, and being able to say whatever they want to say to us and go back on that without any confidence or any consequences. That is what I am encouraging us to change, the way that we have been engaging this process, and to get laser focus to do that. It's not rocket science. It's not going to require for us to do, bending over backwards. What it's going to require for us to do is to change the way that we have been engaging this process. And the way that we've been engaging this process, in many respects, is a selfish way, an individualistic, selfish ideology that you and you and you and your group are willing to compromise to get what you want individually. Well, individualism is a toxic cancer for the advancement of a people. If you want for the damage or the breach to be repaired, called reparations, meaning money that is owed to you gets paid to you through education, through housing, through health, through economic opportunities. All of that. If we think that individualism is going to make that happen, keep going down that road, and you can be assured that the kinds of progress that we could make will not be made by people trying to be individual stars in the ghetto. So that you can be invited to some dinner that they ask you to invite other people to buy tickets so that they can pay for a plaque that they give you for your individual efforts that produced little to nothing for your people. But you got a trophy on your mantle in the ghetto that is falling apart while billions of dollars are passing right by our communities because we are operating in silos, individual silos. Doing great work. That's the dichotomy. We're doing great work, whatever the area that you're working in, whether it is in any one of those areas between the bookmark of education and economics and everything in between. You're doing great work. You're doing great work. Unfortunately, you're trying to be a star in the ghetto by thinking that you can do and get the kinds of advancement with just a few people. It will never happen. It will never happen to where our communities will thrive the way that they ought to thrive if we are operating in these individual silos. We have got to move away from it. It does not work. We have to have a corporate, collective agenda of an attitude. If we bring ourselves together and develop our own independent block of Black empowerment, of a Black voting block, where all of those people in these particular pieces of legislative bodies, that they now see that our individual efforts are being brought together collectively. And where we're saying we're continuing to do that work, except for we are now supporting that work and the people who are doing those work as a block, as one entity. And if the work that they are doing on behalf of our community is not substantiated in money, resources, and investments, then we have to elect some people who will represent the equity of our communities. It is just that simple. It is that simple, and it is absolutely necessary in order for us to move forward, in order for us to advance through all of the clutter of the nonsense that is coming from the opposition. And we cannot allow for the people who we hire or have continued to hire to continue to misrepresent us. But they only do that because we allow them to do it. Now, that's why I want to reiterate to us that while when we do this and when I have these, I have to talk about the news and I have to report But I want to talk about it in context of not complaining, but cultivating ourselves together to refute and to respond and to be strategic. We don't have to stand on the street corners and be loud. No, we can be loud at the ballot box. We can be loud on how we demonstrate our power. We can be loud in our organizing. We don't have to be standing on a street corner. I'm not speaking against that. We can do both and. But standing on the street corner, basically expressing what we are actually going to do at the ballot box, we're physically showing that we have thousands of people who have finally strategically organized ourselves together. And these thousands of us who have strategically organized ourselves together are organizing to reshape the way that our government responds and represents the interest of our communities. That's how we can be loud. That's how we can be forceful, is to say to any particular person who is in a representative office or an office of representation, which means that office is to represent the interest of the people who put them there, that if they are doing anything less than that, then that means that we have to replace them with someone who will do what we demand for them to do. But you and I cannot do that if we have not strategically committed ourselves to having a corporate collective engagement. Everything else is nothing but pure rhetoric and conversation. That's all it is. But we're smarter than that. We're more than that. We're better than that. Let's not use these platforms and that's available to us to not use them to create the kind of strength that we can certainly create, because we have the numbers to do it. We have the numbers in Chicago. We have the numbers in Cook County and the surrounding areas. We have the numbers to create real political power to transform our communities, literally transform our communities, not in 20 years, not in 30 years, but we can do it within 5 years. Well, how can we do it in 5 years? The way that we can do it is we organize ourselves together now. We take the next year, organize ourselves, make sure that we build this independent block. 10 by 10 to win. We build this umbrella of Black corporate collective power that is representing and reinforcing and supporting those who are doing the work. You continue to do the work, but we now have just brought it together. And when we go before any legislative body and we say, we want these investments in our schools, we want these investments in our communities, we want these investments in whatever the area is, whether it's art, whether it's education, housing, business, contracts, all of that. We go to, look, if we in the city of Chicago, 500,000, 300,000 in a block, go to our alderpersons, go to the city council, go to the mayor and say, you know what, Mr. Mayor, at this time it's Brandon. We're not satisfied with any of you all, but we're going to give you an opportunity to turn the tide. Here are the demands. Now, we're not accepting any excuses, but here are the demands. If you cannot deliver, within your remaining time, if we don't see significant deliverance in the remaining time of this term, all of you all, not just the mayor, it's the mayor and it's also the alderpersons, all of them, all of those that we have elected, every black alderman that is in the city council. We are not saying to be against anybody else. We're saying that you have to be for what it is that we want because we elected you. You didn't get elected by a bunch of people from the white community. They elected their older people, and their older people are delivering to them. Our older people are not delivering. So if you are not able to deliver, we understand. We understand that you can't deliver, so that means that you won't be getting our support, and we will be replacing you. Let me tell you something. That is power. We don't have it right now because we're not organized. We have the potential, and we got the resources, which is organizing ourselves together. Then our voice is strengthened, and our voice and our mandates and our demands now have influence and now have power. That's what's happening with the MAGA group. The reason why a Joni Ernst, who as much as came out and had a problem with Pete Hegseth, who said that women should not be in combat. And here she was, a military veteran, and she and Tammy Duckworth, who lost both her legs in combat, sit in the Senate. And Joni Ernst went on television talking about, if you are not good and if you don't fall in line, this is what will happen to you. Because they understand how the MAGA group is organized to make them pay. But you don't go into a political office to do the right thing or to not do the right thing to be in fear of losing an election. But my point is, that is what real power is. Real power is not you knowing who the mayor is or having the mayor's telephone number or even having the mayor's ear. That's not power. That may stroke your ego, but it's not power. It's not influence. Because if it doesn't do anything for the masses of your community, it's not power. The only way that we have power is that it is collective. The advancement comes through mass effort. The power comes through mass organizing together. That's where the power is. Now, you can think otherwise and you can behave otherwise. The results will be the same. You cannot continue to do the same thing expecting that you're going to get different results. It's not going to happen. Not going to happen. Now, coming up in the 8 o'clock hour, I'm going to talk about this whole red light camera, speed camera policy. I'm going to give you the history of it, give you the facts about it, and how Brandon Johnson has fallen in step, in line, just like his predecessors. But I don't want to go into it. I'm going to go into it in the 8 o'clock hours. The other thing I want to talk about next week, make sure you tune in next week. We're going to have a great conversation at on next week's program with Dr. Terry Mason and Gil Thompson. We're going to be talking about diet and how important your diet is to your physical health. And we're going to be talking about it in context of from the factual information and from the context. We're going to have someone who's going to talk about nutrition who'll be on, Gil Thompson. We're going to have Dr. Terry Mason, who's going to be talking about it from medical doctors' viewpoint. It is going to be a very informative, educational conversation. And it's going to be had in the context that many of us have not heard coming from a doctor. So make sure that you tune in for that conversation. It's going to be a great conversation next week. They're going to be both going to be my guests on the program. Yes, I will be working next Monday, but I will not be working on the following. But I will be working next Monday on the 23rd. So tune in for that. We'll have a live program for that next week. You remember when there was, seems like all these corporations, CEOs are just falling in line. Now, obviously it's transactional, but are they really in fear? But you remember there were more than 100 of corporate CEOs that decided that they were going to resign from Trump in 2017 when, in fact, the Nazis in Charlotte, North Carolina, that were carrying tiki torches and talking about they will not be replaced, and one of the vehicles ran down and killed a young woman, 22 years old. And corporate CEOs at that time, when Donald Trump stood before the cameras and said that they were fine people, CEOs, they pulled and left and resigned from their advisory status because he wouldn't denounce that hate. More than 100 or so. When there was this attack on the Capitol on January 6th, these CEOs pulled their support these same CEOs are contributing millions of dollars to the inauguration. Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, who did not give money to Trump's inauguration in 2016 or President Biden. But now they are donating millions of dollars to his inauguration campaign. The man goes on television making all of these wild, untrue statements about his economic policies, which he had none. His economic policies came nowhere close to the economic policies that he inherited from Obama. It's just astonishing how transactional these people are. And Jeff Bezos, by the way, who actually was born in New Mexico, but then he grew up in my hometown, went to my rival high school, not during the same time that I was there because he's younger than I am, but he went to Palmetto Senior High School in Miami, Florida. And then he is bringing in all these folks who, for the most part, are just like him. Bringing in people like Robert F. Kennedy, who said that COVID-19 vaccine was the most dangerous vaccine in the history of the country. And that talked about how the polio vaccine, which two members of Congress, one member of Congress, Mitch McConnell, and then one of our famed national reporters, the late Ed Bradley, both had childhood polio and benefited from the polio vaccine. I mean, there is no scientific link whatsoever that vaccines or the polio vaccine causes autism. Zero. But yet, this is the man that he wants to put in charge of our health. There was a story being told, and it was told to me about when, you had to get the polio vaccine shot on our parents, that generation before us, they all had to get vaccinated. And you got that little shot and you had this little keloid. And as a kid, this one kid said to his mom, Mom, why do you have that little scar there? And his mom said, I have that scar so that you wouldn't have to. She got the polio vaccine to protect her children, as many and millions others did. Polio got wiped out through the vaccine. And yet you have people in this, that this man is nominating to be over these important governmental positions. That's why it is important for us to make sure that we fight back, and we fight back by organizing ourselves together. Hey, listen, if you want to call me, you can. 951-221-8221, 951-221-8221, and voice your comments. All right, let's deal with red light cameras and speed cameras. You all know that I started more than 15 years ago now, Citizens to Abolish Red Light Cameras, when I was on radio. We had no idea how that was going to go, but when I started on radio, there was a young caller had called into the program and said that they liked the station and the information that the station was putting out, but it had one problem, except for we didn't do anything. And I have never set out to be a radio personality, and never considered myself to be a radio personality. But what he said stuck to me, and it stuck with me. And as a result, when I went home, I thought about it, read this, took this book out in this book of fables, and one of them was Who Will Bail the Cat? And I read that fable, but it really stuck with me of what this young man said. And I thought about it, and I was like, I have this platform. Don't know how long I'm going to be on or how long I'm going to have it available, but it has a lot of reach and influence. And I have always thought, and I've always wanted for we the people to exercise our strength. And I thought about, how could I use this? And so I started thinking about, how can I use this that we might be able to impact some public policy that either is beneficial or not beneficial. So I thought about, what is it that bothers me the most? What was I most irritated about in terms of a public policy? And what came to my mind immediately was red light cameras, because I always thought that red light cameras was nothing but a policing for profit scam. That's all I was like, this is nothing but policing for profit, period. So I went to management and I said to management, because they couldn't pay me, right? I was on the air for almost a decade or so, and I've never been compensated a dime. Not a problem. But what I said to them was that I want to be able to use this platform to drive a conversation about a particular policy that is a bad policy, that is preying on the community purely for profit. They were a little bit reluctant to say okay about that, but I said, look, as a trade-off, you can't pay me. You've asked me to do this. I've agreed to do it. This is the compromise. And they were concerned about not necessarily saying okay to it or even doing it, but they were concerned about whether or not I would see it all the way through. Well, as you know, that it is much more difficult to unravel public policy than it is to stop it from happening before it happens. And my commitment was, we will see this all the way through. And of course, it's not done, but we got on top of it and we started. I called a meeting. And at the time, when I was a member of a certain congregation, asked the pastor if we could use the facility on a Friday night to host a meeting. I called a meeting, the first meeting, and then asked the pastor if we could continue to meet there. And that became our headquarters where we would organize and meet. And we met every week, and we started coming up with ideas and how we're going to go about it. Then we moved and we started to get more information and do the research. And we discovered and as we thought, not only did we discover information, but there were people who had information who were just as irritated about it that got on board. There were lawyers who had been fighting the institution or the installation of red light cameras. They came, was a part of us. And then we started demonstrating. We started publicly demonstrating. We started demonstrating every week. We would be on a Saturday from 11 o'clock till 2, that we would be at some red light camera in the city of Chicago, on the north side, on the south side, on the west side, on the east side, every week for more than 2 years, whether it was raining, snow, heat, sunshine, whatever. We were out every week. We made a commitment. We got shirts printed up. We got signs printed up. We developed our own logo. And we started as the citizens to abolish red light cameras. And we started, when I say making noise, not that we were just out making noise, but we were consistent until it attracted the attention of the media, the Sun-Times, the Tribune, even international media, national media, wanting to know who these people are and what their grievance was about these cameras. It got the attention of the media. And so the media started doing some digging itself. David Kidwell from the Chicago Tribune started digging, started doing research. And the more that they would research, the more that they would uncover that there was a real nefarious problem here. And so we discovered through all of this combined collective efforts of bringing our information together, we discovered that the state of Illinois never gave the city of Chicago the authority in 2003 under the mayor leadership of Richard Daley at the time, never gave the city of Chicago the authority to implement red light cameras. What they did is they gave the city of Chicago the authority to look at the policy and then come back to the state and present to the state why, if in fact they wanted to institute this, why they should institute it. They were to provide traffic reports, traffic crash reports of the intersections or where they wanted to put these cameras. They never provided that. What they did in 2003 is they implemented it in 2003 and operated it without state legislative authority until 2006, when it was recognized by an attorney that the city is illegally operating. That attorney then brought forth a lawsuit. The city goes to the General Assembly. The General Assembly allows for the city to operate red light cameras. Well, all of the revenues that was generated from 2003 should have been returned. We went as far as the Supreme Court. And the attorney at the time went to the Supreme Court. We went to the Supreme Court with them to listen to that argument, because they sued at the state level, and at the state level, the case was ruled in favor of the city. They appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court decided to hear the case. Well, of course, a little politics was played there, because in order for a ruling to prevail at the Supreme Court, you have to have a quorum, which means that you have to have at least 4 justices. And they did not have a quorum of 4 justices to vote in favor of reversing the lower court's decision. The argument from our side won a 3-2 vote in favor of reversing, but because there was not a quorum, the lower court's decision stood. There's a little politics in there. A couple of the judges recused themselves, of course. So therefore, did win that battle. Continued to fight, continued to demonstrate, continued to protest. And we then sought out attorneys to do class action lawsuits, couldn't get an attorney, talked to, I don't know, a dozen attorneys or so, maybe more, couldn't get anybody to want to take on the city of Chicago. Then we discovered that the city was violating due process and improperly neglecting to send notices out for people who had gotten red light camera tickets. They're required to send you a notice. First notice comes back. You don't respond within 7 days. They're required to send you a second notice that you have 21 days. And if you don't respond, then at that point, they can find you liable. Then, if you don't respond, or if you don't go and ask for a hearing, they could double the fine. Well, what the city was doing was accelerating that entire process by violating the ordinance and the state statute. And that was discovered that they had been doing that all the way back to 2003. A class action lawsuit was filed. They filed every type of objection that they could file. And in each case, or each one of those filings, the city lost. The class action lawsuit later was certified, which it is very difficult. It is very difficult to get a class action lawsuit certified by a court. This class action lawsuit was certified. The day that that class action lawsuit was certified, the city's attorneys held a press conference and went and said that they acknowledged that they were violating due process. Now, unfortunately, the $600 million that the class action lawsuit initially was going after got reduced to 200 plus million because we could only go back 5 years, which is what the statute of limitation allowed. Now, mind you, the city of Chicago doesn't have a statute of limitation. They can go all the way back as far as they want to go back to force you to pay for tickets that you didn't pay for. But in terms of a civil lawsuit or a civil action, we could only go back 5 years. And as a result, there are 1.1 million violations of due process that was within that 5-year period. The city then tried to circumvent the courts and wanted to get a second bite at the apple, which the state law does not require. So what the city did was they went and had a press conference and said, all right, we're going to send out notices to all of those 1.1 million people and giving them an opportunity to have a hearing. We said no as an option, as a part of the settlement. We said to everybody, you opt not to go have a second hearing. The city doesn't get a second bite at the apple. They got it wrong. And in other words, they want to have a second time to get it right. No. So this lawsuit ultimately got settled with a $38.75 million cash payment that went out to the class and $125 million in debt reduction. And the city had to go back to making sure that they started giving the proper notices. And that's what class action lawsuits are about. It's not about making people wealthy, but it's about making entities and corporations and governments change their behavior. Now, lawyers do make a lot of money, but lawyers end up spending a lot of money because if they lose, then there is no bill. And most people don't have the wherewithal to pay a lawyer $300 to $500 an hour to bring forth a lawsuit. That's why they're called class action lawsuits and why attorneys represent them that way, because there is a risk. They'll pay for the upfront cost to do this, which could be in the millions of dollars. And as a return, they would get paid a certain percentage of any settlement. So we won on that phase of the class action lawsuit. Now, the class action lawsuit was not to, it did not end the policy. It did not end the policy. Of course, it was a step, or is a step. And so as a result, we discovered that the city of Chicago, the city of Chicago was operating an illegal scheme. There's a guy by the name of John Beal, who was the assistant transportation commission. And John Beal had entered into a illegal agreement with Redflex, the then corporation that was managing red light cameras in the city of Chicago. And they struck a deal. John Beals said and agreed with Redflex that they, for every camera that they would get installed, he would get $1,500 for every camera. Now, mind you, the city said that they wanted to have cameras at intersections where there were, quote, high traffic T-bone crashes. Well, the city ended up with the largest number of red light cameras in any other city in the United States of America, and there are 19,400 of them. We ended up with 384 cameras. And the reason why we ended up with 384 cameras is because of this kickback scheme that was cooked up and agreed to by John Beals and Red Flags. And they paid him $1,500 for every camera that he was able to get installed here in the city of Chicago. More than half of the cameras that had been put out were put out at intersections that did not even have a crash within a 12-month period. And so more than half of the cameras should never have been installed in the first place. John Beals was indicted, found guilty, served 10 years. And his bagman, who cooperated, I forgot how much time that he got. And then, of course, the CEO of Red Flags had admitted to this in, I think, 3 or 4 other states and had to serve this concurrent sentence as a plea deal. John Beals made a lot of money by perpetrating this on the city. And then, of course, once this was found out, Daley was no longer in office. Rahm Emanuel was in office. Rahm Emanuel canceled the contract with Red Flex, and now Xerox became, in American Traffic Solutions at the time, became the new contractors. And of course, the corruption continues. Of course, then it spread out into the suburbs. In the suburbs, we have, I think, more than 40 suburbs that have red light cameras, and there's a company that is called Safe Speed, which Nikki Zolar is the president and CEO of. And that company was connected to 13 individuals, some public officials and some private citizens, mostly public officials, that were indicted and convicted on bribery charges and kickbacks connected with that very company and one of its co-owners. And that person decided to cooperate when they were caught. And as a result, they were kind of slapped on the wrist and let go. But the company is still doing business in the state of Illinois. So red light cameras are not safety measures. In fact, they create more problems. Now, the city would tout, you can go on the city's website and they would tout that red light cameras reduce 37%. They throw out these fake numbers, which also got dispelled way back in 2009 or something like that, where the city had said that 47% reductions, when in fact it was only 15% of reduction. But they failed to give the 22% increase of rear-end traffic crashes at intersections where red light cameras were installed after they were installed. They would never report those numbers. But with the help of the Chicago Tribune and their investigation, at the time, the investigative reporter David Kidwell, who researched and worked and uncovered a whole lot of this, which brought down John Beals and the whole scheme of red light cameras. So the point is that for those people who think that red light cameras and speed cameras are about safety, now we have another example of when speed cameras were installed by Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel installed speed cameras for the sole purpose to replace revenue that he took away from the corporate head tax at the exact same time that he canceled the corporate head tax. He replaced the millions and millions of dollars that we were getting from the corporate head tax that nobody was complaining about, no corporation was complaining about. But he cut that and instituted speed cameras that preyed on the most vulnerable communities. And replace the millions of dollars of revenue that they gave back to the corporations and took it from poor people and people who can least afford it by implementing speed cameras. That was the purpose of speed cameras, not about safety. But of course, they tout that it's safety. Who wouldn't? And of course, they use children to say that we need to keep our children safe. And who would not go along with wanting to keep our children safe if, in fact, it was keeping our children safe? Now, mind you, we had no children who were struck by cars around parks or schools in more than 40 years when they implemented speed cameras. But that is the tagline that they use. But it was about safety. Now, if in fact they were producing safety, then that would mean that the revenue that they were generating would be coming down because, of course, the cameras purportedly would have been producing safer streets. Well, the fact is that where they had the camera, each one of those cameras at the time were 162 cameras. They wanted to put out 300, but we were able to push back and they put out 160. There's somewhere around neighborhood of 170 or 180 cameras out. Now, nowhere those cameras are is there any scientific data that demonstrates that there were serious car crashes or people being struck by cars at any of the locations where cameras were. None. Now, of course, each person who ran for mayor, including Lightfoot. Now, the only mayor who'd ever done anything was Rahm Emanuel because there was serious pressure on him. Rahm Emanuel reduced 20% of the cameras just before the election in 2015, I believe it was, or 11, somewhere around there, because the pressure was thick. And that's why I know that mass mobilization works. Mass mobilization is necessary. You cannot do this with just 2 or 3 people or individualism. So Rahm Emanuel gets rid of 20% of the cameras, shuts them down, which shuts down $2 million a month in revenue. Then he brings in speed cameras to make up that revenue, as well as to make up the corporate head tax revenue that they lost. Each person who ran for mayor, including Lori Lightfoot, after Lori Lightfoot, Brandon Johnson, Paul Vallis, Willie Wilson, they all said that they would get rid of red light cameras and speed cameras. Now, of course, Lori Lightfoot won. She didn't. In fact, she doubled down on speed cameras. Brandon Johnson won, and now Brandon Johnson is proposing more speed cameras, $2.64 million in cameras. That buys a lot of cameras to place around so that they can get more revenue. But it was supposed to be about safety. It's not supposed to be about revenue. Brandon Johnson said that we can no longer continue to rely on fines and fees to balance our budgets. But Brandon Johnson is doing just that and proposing to put more out so that we can get more revenue into the city. Not about safety, but so that we can get more revenue. In other words, you all can violate the law, just a fraction of the law, but as long as you violate just a fraction of the law, you're okay as long as we get the money. You can run red lights, but do it at a place where we have red light cameras so you can make sure you give us the money. It's okay. That's essentially what red light cameras and speed cameras are. Permission to drive whatever way you want to. Just make sure you give us the money. It's easy money. We don't really care about traffic safety. If they cared about traffic safety, then we would have traffic safety officers patrolling our streets like they used to. But it is not about traffic safety. It is purely about revenue. And it is about revenue that is taxing the most vulnerable people. The most vulnerable people are the ones who are paying the price. Do you know that the highest generating speed cameras, the highest generating speed cameras are on the south side of Chicago? The highest generating speed cameras are on the south side of Chicago. There have been article after article after article. Matter of fact, there's going to be a documentary that is going to be done about red light cameras in Chicago. And how the red light cameras have been abused and misused purely for revenue and to cause more problems for average, everyday working people. In fact, there was an article that came out that said that more tickets from 2025, after the city drops the speed limit to 25 miles per hour, fines can be as high as $244. This article came out where drivers risk more tickets from 2025 after the city drops the speed limit to 25 miles an hour, purely for the purposes of generating revenue, not for safety, because they're not going to have police officers out enforcing traffic safety, as we should, as most other municipalities in the country has. None of our surrounding states have them. There are 19,400 municipalities in the country, and there is only 150 that have red light cameras or speed cameras. Chicago still has the dubious record for having the most red light cameras in the country and generating the most money per capita for speed cameras. So if speed cameras and red light cameras were real safety producers, Don't you think that more than 150 municipalities out of 19,400 would be looking at this system? In fact, there are 7 states that have now banned any type of electronic red light camera or tickets. The most recent was St. Louis, Missouri. So, according to the Illinois policy, Mayor Brandon Johnson supports reducing the speed limit from 30 miles an hour to 25 miles per hour, adding more speed cameras to help cover the nearly $1 billion budget deficit. The move is expected to lead to a significant increase in tickets being issued as well as revenue. Johnson's recent support for new speed cameras and lower speed limits marks a shift from his campaign promises to eliminate the policies. From January to September 2024, speed cameras issued some $54 million worth of fines, nearly $28 million less than the previous year. Despite the increase, cameras still issued 1.18 million tickets. Most of the revenue came from late fees. These late fees can more than double the original fine, effectively turning a $35 ticket into an $85 ticket and a $100 ticket into a $244 ticket. And that is because if you don't pay it within a certain period of time, then it goes to a law firm that tacks on the collection fee for you to pay. So the average person who gets a $35 ticket, not a $35 ticket, it's an $85 ticket because they don't have the $35 in the first place for just going a fraction over the speed limit. Remarkably, 7 cameras in Chicago issued over $1 million each in fines, which the most profitable camera located in the West Pullman area is located in the West Pullman neighborhood. The Southeast Side had the highest number of tickets of revenue per camera, while the Southwest Side had the least. Overall, Chicago speed cameras have generated $933 million since their inception in 2013. Nearly $1 billion that speed cameras have generated. Recent studies suggest that while speed cameras can reduce crashes around camera sites, they do not necessarily improve overall road safety. Indeed, they are often seen as revenue generators rather than safety measures. This comes as a festively decorated Ford Mustang was pulled over by cops last week. So the point is, and the facts are, that these cameras are for one purpose and one purpose only, is to help the city balance its budget. Now, we don't even know that because the money that is generated goes into what is noted as the general fund. The general fund is not a line item. So even the alderpersons can't go to the mayor, or they can go to the mayor, but the mayor is not obligated by any stretch of the imagination, is not obligated by law to demonstrate to them how much revenue that the city is actually netting and where those revenues are actually being allocated to, because there is no line item for the electronic tickets. It just goes into the general fund, and the mayor, the administration can do with it whatever it wants to do. We have no idea how much money is actually being established by the city. None. We don't know. No idea. We have no idea what the we have no idea what the city is actually generating. What we do know is that the city pays $126 million to Xerox, which is the prime company. We don't know how many of the minority participating companies, we don't even know how many they are. We've been trying to get those contracts. We're still trying to get those contracts. We don't know what the minority participation is. We don't know who they are. We're told of some people, but I cannot repeat that because I cannot factually provide any evidence of that. So I can't repeat those names. And I won't repeat them until we actually have the facts as to who it is that is benefiting from this contract. The other thing that we found is that we've discovered that the state law requires that the city provides a certification that each one of these cameras, the 284 red light cameras and the 165 or 170, whatever the number is now, we have to find out what the new number is, of speed cameras are calibrated to be accurate every week. And when you get a red light camera ticket or a speed camera ticket, that certification, you have the right to go to the Department of Revenue, or you can go down to the administrative hearing, whether it be at 95th and Jeffrey or 400 West Superior, and you can subpoena and ask for the original certification. You can subpoena that. If you get a red light camera ticket or a speed camera ticket, what I want you to do is to go to the 400 West Superior, or if you're on the south side, go to 95th and Jeffrey, and you want to contest your ticket and you want to subpoena the original certification of the camera where the ticket was issued. Because we've been arguing since we started arguing that we want to question the certifier. We want to question the person who issued the violation. We don't even know who it is that is actually reviewing these videos. We're told that it is independently viewed by 3 different people before it becomes quote unquote a violation. We have no idea who these people are. We have no idea who is certifying. We have no idea who the certifier of the certifier is. None of that. Finally, there has been a little justice where it has been noted and a court has observed it the way that we have, and it's challenging the city to provide. Now, there is no way in the world that the city can provide the original signature of the person who, on each one of these tickets, on 15,000 tickets that they issue a day, 15,000. If you take the number of tickets that the city has issued, that they issued 1,000,018 So the city is times issuing these tickets a day. They went from doing 1,100 tickets a day to 11,000 tickets a day. No way in the world. No way are you going to tell me, or this is the city going to be able to prove? So I'm saying to you, when you get a red light camera ticket or you get a speed camera ticket, don't just pay it, contest it. Go to the Department of Revenue and contest it and ask for the original certification with the original signature. You want to subpoena that. You want to summons it when you file for your complaint. So you have to ask for it when you go to file your contest, your date to contest the ticket. We're looking into taking a broader action because, again, this is a violation of due process by the city. So therein lies the problem with red light cameras. And for those people who think that red light cameras are a good thing, they are not. Or speed cameras, they are not. There's nothing that ever beats real traffic safety patrol than having a police vehicle on the streets. One of the greatest deterrents. People are driving out of control in Chicago. Yes, they are. You know why they're driving out of control? They're driving out of control because they know that there is nobody patrolling our streets. They know it. So they don't care about, I've seen it, and I'm sure you've seen it, where people have not only flown by you, they've flown by police officers that never did anything about it, but just let them go because we have relegated traffic patrolling to policing for profit. Policing for profit, saying that you can drive whatever way you want as long as you give us the money. You give us the money and you can drive whatever way that you want to drive. Period. You can drive whatever way that you want to drive. Period. Not a problem. You can drive whatever way you want to drive. Just give us the money. And here you have a mayor who says, we're short $1 billion. Let's put some more cameras out. Let's get some more revenue that way. Let's add another tax on the people who can least afford it. That's essentially what they're saying. Okay, you all don't want to let us raise taxes on property because I said that there was not going to be any raising of taxes. Now, which brings me to another question. If there is so much resistance because he said that there was not going to be any taxes raised, property taxes was not going to raise in his campaign. If there is so much resistance to that, why wasn't there the same resistance from the alderpersons to the mayor about red light cameras and speed cameras? Because they don't mind taxing people who can least afford it. under the disguise of safety because they can bamboozle people into thinking that this protects our children. But I bet you don't hear them standing up talking about banning guns. I bet you don't hear that. The leading cause of death for children are not cars, is not cancer. The leading cause of death for children in America are guns. Guns. You don't hear anybody talking about banning guns. You hear this foolish rhetoric about guns, about protecting my Second Amendment rights. That's what you hear about. Well, today we had our 487th mass shooting. We had our 59th school shooting in this country, where it is being reported that there are 3 or 5 deaths as a result of a juvenile having a gun in school. To the Abundant Life Christian Academy in Madison, Wisconsin today. And of course, we had to hear the same. Our hearts and prayers and thoughts go out to the families who now have to live with the trauma of a dead family member because of a gun that a child had access to. Not hearing anybody talking about that, about restricting guns at all, or putting some type of fines or fees on guns. You don't hear about that. You don't hear a single person I don't hear a single person in our city council talking about the problem of guns. And we have people being shot every day here in Chicago. I don't hear anything about people talking about dealing with that. But of course, if we don't have some national agenda, you can make all of the restrictions that you want, although they have some sort of benefit and save lives. We still have far too many. But the leading cause of death for children today are guns. But you're not going to hear about doing something about that. It is not cars. Children are not dying by being struck by cars in Chicago. They're being struck by bullets in Chicago and other places around these United States of America. All right, folks. So I just want to close tonight's program. And don't forget to tune in next week. We got a great program for you next week. We're going to be talking with Dr. Terry Mason and Gil Thompson. Next week, going to be a great conversation next week leading into the Christmas holiday. And what a perfect time to have that conversation talking about your health connected to your diet. That is going to be the conversations that we're going to have next week, Dr. Terry Mason and Gil Thompson. Make sure you tune in for the program. I want to ask you to please join us. Let us bring ourselves together so that we can empower ourselves to make demands and have those demands met. But we can only do it when we do it in mass. So I'm asking you to text 10x10. Text 10x10 to 855-909-1385 and join us. Join us on Thursday nights by Zoom when we're talking about mobilizing ourselves together. That's precisely what we're talking about, is organizing ourselves together so that we could have the kinds of mass strength that we need to make demands from the people who are in our representative seats so that they will deliver what we want them to deliver. And if they don't, then they can pay the price the same way that the MAGA is doing to Republicans on the other side. But we want to use it, the same methodology, to make sure that they deliver what we want for our communities. That's where your power is. Your power is not in who you know. Your power is in our mass struggle and our mass cooperation and our mass collectiveness. That is where our power is. Not about making somebody a star in the ghetto. We can all shine. We all shine when our community is shining, when our community is brighter, when our community is sitting on a brighter landscape, where guns are not the topic of discussion in Black communities, where unemployment is low in Black communities on the South Side and West Sides of Chicago, that we now still have 47% unemployment in Black males 18 to 25. We can eliminate this. Billions of dollars coming to the state of Illinois that will be flowing either in our communities or past our communities, depending upon what we do. That's going to do it for me tonight, folks. I want to thank you all for tuning in to the People Show right here on intellectualradio.com, iHeartRadio, and Instagram and Facebook and YouTube. You can go back and see the show if you just go and register at YouTube. There's no cost to registering. Let's get those numbers up so that we can get our voice stronger out there for our meeting. See you all next week. Take care.